these theologies, first we should know the basic structure of Calvinism, and in this presentation I have also talked about the danger of Calvinism and what Calvinists were called in different areas. As we know that early modern Europe is the period of European history between the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, roughly the 15th century to the late 18th century. And Reformation is one of the notable trend, or we can say event, of this period. Now you will be thinking that what is the relationship of Calvinism to Reformation. So first of all I will tell that Reformation is period from 1517 to 1648. Here Reformation means protest for religious corruption. So in Reformation what was happening? The question is, because of corruption in the Catholic Church, some people saw that the way it worked needed to change. People like Erasmus, Martin Luther, John Calvin, and there were many more, saw corruption and tried to stop it. And this led to a split in church into Catholics and various Protestant churches. In their own different ways, these people tried to stop corruption, like Martin Luther's posting of the 95 Theses at Wittenberg is seen as the start of the Protestant Reformation. Because Reformation was happening in tradition, Christianity as well as Protestant, so Calvinism, also called the Reformed tradition, Reformed Christianity, Reformed Protestantism, and the Reformed faith. So we can say that Calvinism is a major branch of Protestantism that follows the theological tradition and forms of Christian practice of John Calvin and other Reformation era theologians. So now Calvinism, we can also say that Calvinism is a school of systematic theology that emphasizes the sovereignty of God, who through the doctrine of predestination has ordained an elect to join him in the kingdom of heaven. The word Calvinism is sometimes used to refer to particular Calvinist views on soteriology and predestination, which are summarized in part by the 5 points of Calvinism. I will discuss these 5 points of Calvinism later, and some have also argued that Calvinism as a whole stresses the sovereignty or rule of God in all things, including salvation. Now John Calvin, who was John Calvin? John Calvin was the father of Reformed or Calvinism theology. So what happens is, in 1541, John Calvin, a French Protestant who had spent the previous decade in exile writing his Institutes of the Christian Religion, was invited to settle in Geneva and put his Reformed doctrine, which stressed God's power and humanity's predestined faith, into practice. The result was a theocratic regime of enforced austere morality. Calvin's Geneva became a hotbed for Protestant excise, and his doctrines quickly spread to Scotland, France, Transylvania, and the Low Countries, where Dutch Calvinism became a religion and economic force for the next 400 years. So now, again, coming to the point that Calvinists broke from the Roman Catholic Church in the 16th century but differed from Lutherans. Lutherans were the followers who followed Martin Luther's theology. So Calvinists broke from the Roman Catholic Church in the 16th century but differed from Lutherans on the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, theories of worship, and the use of God's law for believers, among other things. The movement was first called Calvinism by Lutherans, who opposed it, and many within the tradition who prefer to use the word Reformed. The term Calvinism can be misleading because the religion tradition denotes is and has always been diverse with a wide range of influences rather than a single founder. Calvinism is named after John Calvin, and it was first used by Lutheran theologian in 1552. Now again there is a point that from the Reformed tradition as a branch of Protestantism distinguished from Lutheranism, divided into two separate groups, that one is Arminians and second is Calvinists. So Calvinism is most famously associated with what is called the 5 points of Calvinism, as I have told before, and are represented by the acronym TULIP. So this T, what the T defines. T means total depravity. A person is completely touched by sin in all that he is and cannot freely choose God because he is enslaved to sinful desires. U means unconditional election. God's election to salvation is not based on what is in man but what is in God. L means limited atonement. Jesus bore the sins of elect alone, not every individual who ever lived. I means irresistible grace. God's gracious calling to salvation cannot be resisted, but will result in salvation. P means perseverance of saints. The elect are secure in Christ and cannot lose their salvation. Now here I have discussed a summary of TULIP, not deeply but a summary. Now the spiritual danger of TULIP Calvinism is in believing that God is not loving enough, not good enough to save all. John Calvin's doctrines did not modify Catholicism, they took an entirely different direction. So now you can feel free to disagree with Calvin's premise, but his logic is hard to refuse. Calvin believed salvation to be a free gift from a sovereign God that could neither be earned nor taken away. Only God has complete authority over humanity, salvation, and on church. For Calvinism, fashion was a sign of vanity. He was in favor of plain clothes. Removal of statues and paintings from churches took place during the time of Calvinism. These destructive rampages were known as the iconoclastic fury. So now, what are the dangers of Calvinism? Calvinism had led some to believe in a number of very dangerous false teachings, like a number of well-known preachers are spreading a dangerous view known as once saved always saved, OSAS. So now this OSAS teaches that once you become a believer of Christ, you will always be saved no matter what you will do in your life. Calvinists live by strict code to avoid sin called Protestant work ethics. Cannot dance, sing, play cards, you cannot gamble, you cannot swear, go to theater, or you cannot drink alcohol, wear jewelry or bright clothing. Church 5 times a week, on bed by 9. Kids can have only Christian names. Homes inspected for once in a year. Punishment for breaking rules, prison, exile, death. So now those people who used to follow Calvin theologies, they were Huguenots, Pilgrims, Presbyterians. So who were Huguenots? These were the followers of Calvinism in France, originating in the 16th and 17th century. Pilgrims were the English separatists who left Europe for America in search of religious toleration, eventually settling in New England. Presbyterians were Calvinists in Scotland, Ireland, and England. Puritans were English Protestants who wanted to purify the Church of England. Continental Reformed churches, Calvinist churches originated in continental Europe, and Waldensians were Italian Protestant, preceded Calvinism. but today identify with Reformed theology. So this was my presentation on overview of Calvinism, in which I have discussed what an overview of Calvinism and the dangers of Calvinism and many more things. Thank you.